your main thing at the moment is ley lines, and we were going to ask how these physically affect you. In fact, you could end up having a conversation about crop circles if you slipped a long way down that particular path, couldn't you? But ley lines, what sort of physical effects do you get from sensing them, feeling them, working with them, and so on?
Right, do you want me to start? You have to remember that in ancient times, the ancient people understood these energy lines. James Redfield, in his book The Celestine Prophecy, spoke about places of high energy. And there are these places all over the place, apart from where they've been destroyed by man. But if you join them together, they tend to be in straight lines. And as a consequence, the ancients set up their sacred groves, their sacred places, their temples, where they worshipped the gods of nature. And they understood, which we don't now, but of course they, as we were talking earlier, they lived at a different pace. They were slow enough to be able to feel the subtle differences. And there were special people, the people of the craft, of wise women, that would know exactly where to gather their herbs or to build their sacred temples. And rather fortunately, strange as it may be, in the 7th century, Pope Gregory the Great, issued this edict to Archbishop Mellitus of this country, saying, do not destroy the sacred groves. He's a bit like that, yes.
Bit of animal medicine jumping in from the side.
Yeah. He said, incorporate them into your temples, your own places of worship. So they were set up on the ley lines. They were set up on the energy lines that the ancients understood. This was to attract the ancient peoples into the Christian churches. And so consequently, the oldest of the churches tend to be on ley lines, which makes it that much easier for us to track them down and to...
Which is where we start, isn't it? When we go out, we always start, usually at a point of church, or where we've found groves on maps, generally sit on ley lines as well, and old stately homes sit on ley lines. People then understood the energy lines again.
So it's just a witch's cat, don't worry about that.
And obviously, if you're on a positive ley line, a good energy line, then you will prosper from it. And our ancients knew this, and that was why that they put their properties or their worship places on these lines. So we go out and we'll always generally start with a church, won't we? And people always ask, do you use instruments to fill the ley lines? No. Sometimes I may use a dowsing rod to just confirm what I can feel. And I don't just think it's me as a medium that can feel these things, because I've taken novices out to, they say to me, how do you feel a ley line? And I go, well, let me take you to one and we'll see. And I just get them to stand very still and become very empty-minded and empty-vesseled, as you would to do healing or any form of spiritual work. And
it's just the witch's cat playing up again. Don't worry about it. Some funny energies around here today.
And in actual fact, when you know, I remember one of the first times that Mike took me out, and I walked down the side of this church, and all of a sudden my legs just went like they were elastic. I could barely stand up. I'd sort of stumbled across sideways through a hedge and ended up in the field next door that was actually a horse cross-country field. And I was like, whoa, what is that? And that was the ley line pushing me out through
Did you
there.
translocate or just wander?
It just pushed me. It was almost like someone else had got a hand on me and was pushing me as I kind of staggered and lost my balance, if you want to put it that way. When I've taken people out who are not used to feeling such things, we may walk across the pathway of a ley line, and as we walk across it, they may trip or lose their balance, something you would never normally think of being significant until you learn to stop and centre yourself to feel such things. And then by feeling them, you can start expanding on that. I'm now even at the point that when we turn up at a church, I will quite often be able to visually see that line and how it runs through the church and down the next field, for instance.
Do you see just an energy shimmer like a heat haze or a colour? Or
it's more again in my third eye, so it's an impression of, I think a couple of times I've got out the car and run past a church to a stile at the end of a graveyard and sort of pointed my arm out when it goes down here, and then we've looked at the maps and we know that there is another church down there that I cannot see the steeple of, and the line clearly does run through both churches. People feel it in different ways. I generally get an impression on one side of my body, so it will feel a bit heavier to start off with, but the side of my body that I've got an impression on will be the way that the energy is flowing. So if, for instance, if I felt it on this side, the energy would be coming
that way.
Coming this way, you know, into the right hand side of my body, and if I turned round, I could feel it on the left hand side of my body. And again, I've had people who are quite novices in this, and I've stood them there, and they may get goosebumps down one side of their leg, and then I turn them round and the goosebumps change to the other side of their legs. But you can see how if we're just passing through these areas very quickly, without thinking, you just sort of do that, someone just walked over my grave, for instance, feeling. And it's insignificant. It only becomes significant when you stop and listen and give it an understanding. But I do think that we can all feel them.
There's a couple of sort of foreign things spring to mind when you say this. And one of them is that the Australian Aboriginals, when they're stuck in the middle of the desert and they need water, they listen for the song. And what you call a ley line, or what we in this country call a ley line, they call a song line.
Also
And I love, the dream times, that sort of extension of that. But I love that word for it. I know if it's because I'm a singer, but I love thinking that you can actually hear the song of water.
Yeah.
Or a different object. And of course, the other thing that it resonates with is Chinese feng shui. Because what you're really describing is exactly the same thing said another way, isn't it? You know, working almost with the world's meridians and building structures to fit with the flow of what's there, and hope somebody doesn't come and build a rubbish dump somewhere along.
Yeah. But if we look at the maps of sort of you know, ancient times or older times, you will see that again these churches, these big stately homes are almost on the ley lines or very, very close by. And then it was like they pushed just the menial people of the villages out, and you know, where those people lived was not on such great land.
Peasant land.
Peasant land, yes, if you want to call it that. And you know, in some stately homes even built massive, great big walls up round to keep people out of them. So it's been understood for many years.
But it's not just us that can sense the energy lines. It is fairly well documented that birds actually use ley lines.
Say that.
Yeah. And that's a point of concern at the moment, because the ley lines appear to be quite close in vibrational wavelength as 5G radiation. Now, I've heard reports of birds falling out of the sky and all the rest of it, and I can quite believe that, which is why I'm so strongly against 5G being introduced willy-nilly, shall we say. But the birds, if they use them in their migration, which they appear to, they stop in trees, and one of the things that they eat is mistletoe. They eat the mistletoe berry, which has to pass through the gut of the bird before it can germinate. So they go from tree to tree, and so you'll find that there are great avenues of trees with mistletoe on. And so that's one of the indicators to us. If we get near a church, we see mistletoe. Inevitably they're in straight lines. I mean, Long Melford or Kempton Hall, isn't it? No, Kempton. Kentwell. Sorry.
Kentwell, yeah.
The avenue there is lined with mistletoe.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So that will be one of our indicators that we look for, and it appears that as of yet we haven't found mistletoe that is not on a ley line or an energy line.
It seems to like good energies, and the birds transmit the seeds so they can grow. I'm sure there are parts of the country where there's loads of trees and the mistletoe grows all over the place, just sort of saturation point. But certainly around here, it's a very good indicator. If you see a lot of mistletoe, the A12, Stratford St Mary, the willow trees along the Sallow, whatever they are, they've got loads of mistletoe. And you can have a look across the field, and there's another line that converges at Stratford St Mary Church. And you can see the mistletoe. In the winter you can see them.
Yeah, the winter's a good time actually to go out and just visually look, because you can see these lines of mistletoe. Whereas the summer is very good for seeing how prosperous some of the ley lines are. There was a church which I cannot remember the name of that we went to. I think, was that Stoke by Nayland?
Stoke by Nayland, yeah.
And this one has, as we walk up to it, has pudding stones outside, which we will come to afterwards in a moment. But this has an absolutely beautiful line that runs through it. And next door to the church, which actually, I'm just going to try and describe it. You walk down the path into the church, and the church is on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side is a brick wall, and the land drops down if you look over the wall. And I'm not sure if it's the vicarage house or just a grand house that was kind of next to it, but it has the most beautiful vegetable garden. And because you're up above it, you can look down onto it. And that garden is just vibrant. It's vibrant beyond what it should be, even, you know, with you looking after it and tending to it in, you know, a loving manner. And it's clearly the ley line that runs through, and the good energies which are causing that garden to be much more prosperous than it would normally be.
So there's an argument that mistletoe feeds off pure energy, or is drawn to it.
Well, it's between the worlds, isn't it?
It's a magical property of some sort. Yeah. And how do you see that, you know, the veil between the worlds? Is that something that an ordinary person can perceive, or do you necessarily need sort of second sight or some special event to glimpse it?
No, I don't think so. I think anyone can see it if they stop and quieten themselves, centre themselves, as Lucy said. Then they can sense the energy there. But the birds just automatically know where the line is. Apparently, UFOs follow ley lines as well.
You've beat me to it again.
And hence why so many crop circles do appear on ley lines.
Nearly always.
Yeah. I mean, I'm no expert on this, but having read Andrew Collins' book and what have you, I think I'm quite convinced, yes, there is a connection. Whether they're feeding or harvesting our energies, I don't know. But
and we can see physical forces of ley lines, where we said before, where you get sometimes a geopathic line, which is in a way a man-made line, and a ley line that crosses, it creates some kind of vortex. It doesn't always open up bad things such as portholes or anything like that, but it does create a swirl of energy. And when we've been out in the field, I've stood there on that point with a compass, and the compass cannot find where it is. It just swings if I stand on the area where the ley lines cross, which is quite an interesting indicator. Because although I can feel it, I'd like to have something physical as well, that we can see and we can document.
Confirmation.
Yeah, confirmation that what you're feeling is correct. Which is why our dynamics is quite interesting, because although we're both spiritually aware people, with Mike's background of science, it kind of brings the two together quite nicely.
A place somewhere like Borley, so it changes the subject slightly. Borley has 5 ley lines that actually intersect.
Where is Borley exactly?
Borley is near Long Melford. It used to be, Borley Rectory used to be the most haunted place in...
Oh, that one,
yes, that one, okay. So there are 5 lines. Now if you walk around the perimeter of the church grounds, because it's actually, you can't get there, they make it very difficult for you to get near it now. But if you walk round, you walk through the 5 lines, and obviously there are 10 effective lines coming up, and you can feel the difference. If you take your time, you can feel the difference between the energies of the lines, and 1 or 2 of them are really sad lines. They're not nice at all. The one that goes through Sudbury is not good.
Do you know why?
No, basically. There's a church, I can't remember the name of the place, just the other side of Sudbury from Borley, and that's the darkest church I've ever been in or around. It's not nice. So whether it's actually been used for some rather unpleasant activities, I don't know. But the thing is that, well, the last time I went there, I went with a friend who I used to work with, was Tina Bird, and we parked up on one of the lines without realising, because it was the only place where we could park, and it was a bad bit of ground, and she got a migraine almost immediately. So we did the circle, and then we went off to Long Melford, where the energies are really good, and as soon as we got near to the energy line at Long Melford, she said, migraine's gone. And this also happened at Mersey, at West Mersey Church, where I know someone that was with also was healed of their problem. So we know that there are healing energies associated with good energy lines. Okay, so there's quite a few things that we can feel. It's probably not best to advertise this, otherwise everyone's going to be flocking to these.
Yeah, everybody has an ache or a pain. But then we do have Little Walsingham, don't we, that is on a ley. You were explaining the first lecture I attended, and that apparently does have some kind of healing property, and people do go there.
Well, Walsingham Abbey or Priory was on the original Walsingham line. Unfortunately for the Catholic Church, it was sold. No, it was taken away from the Catholic Church during the Reformation. And they failed to buy it back, so they built their own shrine at what is the Slipper Chapel at
that's right,
at Walsingham now, and somehow or other they've managed to tap into that line, which is only about a mile away. So they've used some psychic forces or the appropriate people to draw the energy. Yeah, and it is famous for its healing. They get thousands of people there for healing. And I'm going to stop there because there's a darker side to everything.
You think there's a darker side to Walsingham, of all places? I thought it was like...
Did you say that? How could that possibly be?
Well, there's a darker side to organised religion, certainly, and I'd assume it had something to do with that.
Yeah.
I know the whole legend of of Walsingham and the vision and the Virgin Mary and all the rest. But I didn't know that it had any sort of dark stories.
Well, it's only what I've heard.
Yeah, he's itching, isn't he? But he's keeping himself restrained.
Indeed.
Yeah, I don't blame you in this day and age we live in. Best to avoid the lawsuits.
Yeah, well, quite, yes, indeed.
But generally, I feel it's a good area.
Yeah, yes, it is. A lot of people believe strongly in that, and it is drawing good energy. Yes, absolutely right.
And I think the water, the holy water, does have something to it.
Yeah, yes.
I've actually gone picked some up in big containers and brought it back and sort of drank it. Other local ley lines of power. I mean, this documentary is taking place in the city of Norwich. What else do we have nigh and by here?
Well, we know that the ley lines, although we haven't actually documented them fully, which if we're invited back, we will come out and do some research work, and we will draw maps up so you can see where the lines go. But the initial investigation shows that they run parallel to the lines in Suffolk, and there's a sort of a purity about, like a grid that is created for this. And my understanding, whether it's right or not, is that it comes from the pure land of Doggerland, which was under the North Sea.
I actually was in a documentary about that. That's another story about how it became flooded. Yeah. So I know that story very well.
So the purity of energy that's trapped there creates these wonderful lines that run up at about 30 degrees to east-west. But
it was flooded very suddenly, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The argument was that one day it was like a thriving community, and the next day, tsunami and gone.
Yes, I believe that's probably right. Yeah.
But you feel that this is somehow related to the local ley lines? They ran up into the Dogger Bank as it is now?
Yeah, well, I think that because as soon as we come out of Essex into Suffolk, the energies change much better. And
they're nicer, aren't they? They're much lighter and...
And I know that there is a line that runs from what was the end of the Michael and Mary line.
That's the lowest off to Cornwall line, isn't it? More or less.
Yeah, yes. sorry, my brain's gone mush.
Michael, Mary, Lowestoft, Cornwall.
Yeah.
No, where it reaches the
He's
coast
trying to-
is
There's Hopton.
Galston.
Well, Hopton, near
Yeah.
enough.
No, it's important because at Galston, the name Galston comes from a stone circle that was up there, and it was called the Gull Stones.
I've heard this. What does that mean? What are the gull stones?
Well, it's a bit like a smaller version of Stonehenge.
And
So-
where was this in Galston?
Well, just it's in the middle of a housing estate now. There's nothing left of it.
Oh dear.
Yeah, we went searching for it, and you can plot. You can either use your own sensors or a dowsing rod. You can find out where it was, but it's just all built on. And they took the stones in the 17th century, and they put them to reinforce the harbour at Galston.
That's criminal, isn't it?
Well, that was under the directions of the church. They didn't want people going there and worshipping the deities, the pagan
Move
deities.
the opposition
Yeah,
with
that's
no
exactly.
subtlety.
Yeah. So, but from that point, we do know that there is a major ley line that runs sort of diagonally across the country. I haven't investigated it. It's one of the things that we plan to do. Because it'd be interesting to see where it cuts through the Norfolk coast there or to the Wash. It'd be good to follow that up.
There again, sudden flood. The Wash was land,
Mm.
and then it flooded literally in a day, didn't it? And arguably King John lost his gold in that.
That's right, yes. Yeah. Yeah, there's some interesting things that crop up regarding that. We were
Yeah.
going to actually have a trip up there to look for his gold because we thought we'd tracked it down because of the energy lines, but we didn't get
And you
around to it.
need some scuba gear for that.
it's pretty muddy up there, to say
Yeah.
the least. Yeah.
Because they were his camel train, horse mule train, whatever it was going across at the exact moment that it flooded, or so
So it said.
the
yeah.
legend goes. You know, we have Robin of Locksley buried here in Norwich. At the Cow, not the Cow Tower, the other Black Tower on Carrow Road.
No, I hadn't.
Yeah,
actually heard
so
that.
the original Robin. You know, we're going back to that the age of King John.
Yeah.
I thought I'd just mention that the historic counterpart to Robin of Locksley, obviously wasn't him, but he's buried just down the road here. You might like to go and check that place out. I think you'd enjoy that.
We may indeed, yes. Another thing that we've found, well, another couple of things we've found as indicators of ley lines, quite rare in particular, is once we're back to butterflies again. Sorry, we were talking about butterflies earlier.
I didn't.
How we must come
hear
back
that
to the
bit.
pudding stones.
Yes.
But the butterflies, I'm curious with the butterflies. Where do they figure in?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask about that. They seem to be somehow tied in with small elementals, which you won't go into because people will think just to take
You're
the-
saying this sitting beside a pixie.
Yes.
So I mean, we can take it as read that the elementals are a part of this conversation.
Yes, yes. Well, the one that appears on ley lines on a fairly regular basis is the yellow brimstone butterfly. And because of their colourful nature, it's very easy to spot them. And
Indeed.
yeah, and the most interesting occasion was when we were looking, I think it was Standon, a village sort of further inland from where we are. And we were looking for a crossroads of energy lines, of ley lines. And we were in the churchyard where we expected it to be, and suddenly this yellow brimstone butterfly flew across, stopped exactly at the tomb where we were standing, and went off on the other line. Quite incredible bit of evidence, and we just stood there totally bewildered.
Was that an intelligence at work, or was it
Well-
an elemental simply showing you the way? I mean, did it get blown there by some greater force, or was it a little fairy saying, "Hey, over here, mate"?
Your guess is as good as mine, but it certainly did the job. It proved where the line was, and then later on the Walsingham line, we were looking for the line where it passed through one of the big churches on the way up there in Suffolk, and once again the yellow brimstone just flew past us over the church, and when we referred to it on the map, it was exactly where the ley line went.
Does this particular breed of butterfly have an established history within mysticism, or is this something that's peculiar to yourselves?
I've never heard of anyone talk about it, so it's probably because
No, and a lot of the stuff that we're going out and researching, there aren't really any books on, are there?
no, maybe people are thinking can't talk about this.
We keep saying we need to
Fairies,
write those books.
Is that still
for the
true?
future.
Do people still feel that they can't talk freely about the elementals or anything? Because you're right, you do need to write those books, and I think in these days, make videos.
Yeah.
Because you reach so many more people that way than with the written word, I think. You can reach like millions and millions.
I still think people tend to switch off when you mention certain things.
Still?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that shouldn't stop us talking about it, because the more people that talk, presumably, the more seriously it'll be taken.
You reach critical mass of 10%, I think, don't you?
We've also found certain plants, haven't we?
Yeah, cinquefoil is one classic. If you're familiar with
There's
cinquefoil.
little yellow
I'm not a
flowers.
herbalist or anything like
Right,
that.
so it's suppose the same family as strawberry. The flowers look like yellow strawberry flowers. Okay, and it has, because it's cinquefoil, it's 5 sepals, sorry, 5 leaflets to the leaf, so it's 5 where the name comes from. And if you find that, inevitably it's on good energy lines. No idea why. I need to talk to somebody in the biology department at the university or something. And,
We just try to document, don't we, what we find, our findings when we go out to these places, and we just see things reoccurring again and again and again.
yeah.
Because we as yet haven't actually found any information of any of this being documented.
No, I don't think anyone has done
before, so we've got nothing to kind of go to or relate it to. So, as far as we're concerned, we're kind of finding it as we go, maybe for the first time, and that's why we go home and document it and look for the similarities between places like like plants such as that. The way that trees grows and plants grow on these positive lines.
Yeah.
And about the only thing that's ever been documented is the pudding stones, which are ley marker stones. They
Explain.
look like
Got
puddings.
some
We have-
pictures, yeah. Some of they just use very large pieces of stone, usually fairly high in quartz.
Okay.
And whether they amplify the lines or whether they were just markers, but the ancients would put them down so that people knew where the lines were. Now there are 1 or 2 villages around where there are still good signs of them. Boxford.
And the church that I mentioned earlier was at Stoke by Naylands.
Yeah, Stoke by Naylands.
That's got
just down the road.
lovely pudding stones on the outside of it. And you will even see them sometimes. They were that significant to people that you will still today find buildings where the fabrication of the building has been built over a pudding stone that was there before the building. And you'll see a wall with a pudding stone in it that
protect
sticks
it.
out. Yeah, so they knew not to take the pudding stone away and to leave it where it was.
But they still built there.
And they still built, and they built over and their wall over and around of their house or the building.
Sproughton is probably the classic one. Sproughton on the outskirts of Ipswich.
Ipswich, just as you come into Ipswich from the Lowestoft direction.
Do you know the Wild Man? I mean, not literally. The pub called the Wild Man.
I think I've been in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That has a lovely pudding stone in the wall.
There's a couple. They've painted them black, so you have to really look for them. But they're in the wall because one of the lines goes up the street there next to the pub, and you can still see it there. But they've incorporated quite a few pudding stones in the building of the church at Sproughton, and that's the classic one. I usually take people there to show. Because they've got quite a good ray right along the church. Got pictures of it in the folder, and we usually hand them out. But yeah, ley marker stones. Boxford is one because one of the stones there looks like a sheep. It looks like a lump of pudding made in the shape of a sheep. It's interesting.
Stone.
Pudding stones. Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking, if you were a gold prospector and you learned to acquire a degree of sensitivity and develop an eye for these things, your chances of striking your claim are going to be better, aren't they?
Mm.
Because you think, oh, no, there's mistletoe over there, there's a pudding stone down there, there's a church up. You know, you'd know where to drop your sieve, wouldn't you? You know, or you'd have a much better chance with your little sieve, especially if you found a little stream. I mean, I don't think we got gold in this country anymore, but if you could learn the same thing in California or somewhere, and you wonder if people ever have done it that way.
Yeah, no idea.
No.
Uri Geller worked for oil companies. He used divination, which I'm not sure that was a particularly moral way of going about it, but he certainly used divination, you know, for the big oil companies and gas companies. Whether he did it, you know, in the way you're saying, and whether he did it just from here, I don't know, but that's documented.
Well, it's fair comment. The trouble is mankind is abusing all of its senses, and that's the only trouble with documenting stuff like this, that there will be people that will go out and
Gold digging.
Yeah.
start gold digging. Yeah.
It's a shame, isn't it? Because what they should be digging for is something that doesn't have any catastrophic effects, and then they'll just disappear when they find it.
Yeah. Yeah, most of the ley marker stones that are listed, if you go on the internet, most of them have been removed and put on rockeries and things, broken up, because they're nice big lumps of stone.
That's terrible.
It is, but fortunately there's still quite a lot in streets. I mean, Stone Street, which is near Boxford. Oh, Kersey is another one that's got them actually set into the pavement. You know Kersey?
I don't know Kersey, no.
Beautiful village with the ford at the bottom of the hill.
We have some places like that on the outskirts of Norwich, you know. We got like sort of forded roads.
Yeah. Well, in this case, there's a church at one end and an old priory at the other end, and you've got this valley with the stream in the middle, a little river, and halfway up the road there are these huge lumps of stone that are set in the pavement.
It's quite beautiful there as well, isn't it? It's very picturesque and it's lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely place.
Have you yourself experienced any particularly strong physical effects from standing in a ley line? Or you know, have you had any really powerful kind of, you know, sort of visions or migraines or heavy spirit contact? You know, have you gone into, what was that? Or
No, I suppose we're a bit fortunate that the end of my garden goes down into the woods, and we discovered about a year ago that there was actually a ley line that runs through that part of my garden. It's not the most powerful of ones. It runs up from East Mersey Church, Wivenhoe Church, and diagonally across my garden. And I go down there regularly to see which direction the line is
and
running.
your garden's actually split in two, isn't it? So
Yeah.
we've kind of got the top part of the garden, which has got a massive cabin in it that we use for teaching out of and healing. Not that it looks massive. It looks really tiny until you open the door. And next to that, you've kind of got a picket fence, haven't you? And then it goes down into what we call the dell beyond, which is where you can really feel the ley line down there. And it has very distinct different feeling from the top part of the garden to the bottom. And the ley line actually just tips onto the corner of our healing cabinet. And it does cause us a few issues.
what might they be?
Oh, more with our own balance, because they knock us off. So when we've got our healing couch up in our cabin, and you're in a bit of an altered state whilst you're giving healing or psychic surgery or such likes, and obviously move around the couch and forget about the ley line that's at the bottom, we quite often lose our balance, don't we? And end up in the wall or... Yeah, brings us back to the earth plane quite quick, doesn't it, when we lose our balance?
But we haven't actually tried sitting and meditating on a ley line. They seem to vary so much in their energies. And this guy in Scotland, I've been reading his book. He's done some energy work regarding the circles up there and the lines that join them and all that stuff. And it seems, according to him, that the lines actually go underground and then above the ground, and so there is this very long wavelength, a bit like that of microwaves.
And that's something we're looking into at the moment, because we've noticed that on certain heights you can feel something different. And the ley line never seems to be that wide either,
No,
does
they're
it?
only about 2 metres wide.
Yeah. For instance, the house that I live in at the moment has a ley line that runs straight through the front door. which
is that at all dangerous? Because you do hear stories of people getting sick from living on leys.
Yeah, this is a positive line. Obviously, animals can see spirit, and a ley line does allow things to pass through it. Like I've said, it's a highway. As long as it keeps passing through, that's fine and doesn't stay.
So as long as it's a positive
As long as
ley,
it's
not a
positive
negative
and it
one,
keeps
it won't make
moving,
you ill.
Yeah,
or
it should be
send
absolutely
you
fine.
mad.
But you might just see flickers out of the corner of your eye every now and again. But I'm not too bad when I'm downstairs in the house, and if I stand in the hallway there, I can deal with that. But when I go upstairs in the house, and I've only got a hallway a bit like a terraced house that's about 2 foot square, and with a flight of stairs off of it, that if I stand there for too long, I really am feeling very woozy and off balance, and I wouldn't want to move through there too quickly in case the staircase became my demise. But we're just starting to notice how sometimes you can feel the ley lines on different heights more.
Yeah, I mean, another thing, going back to Sproughton, I know someone, actually a medium, who was on her way back from a demonstration of clairvoyance, and her car stopped outside of the church. No sooner did it stopped, it started up again, and she drove off. And that was where she passed through the energy line, and it's a bit like if you're into physics, the 3-1 thumb sort of set up, so that if you've got something metallic and carrying a charge and you're passing through a magnetic field, or a field, as in this case a ley line, it has an electrical effect at right angles to each, so it shut down the electrics of the car.
Now again, this sounds like ufology, doesn't it?
It does.
We'll come to that in a minute, because the amount of times you hear that, the flash and lights flew over the car and the instruments all shut down, and as soon as the thing had gone, they all come back on again.
Yeah. So it's a thing about metallic things passing through ley lines. I know someone who had trouble up at Lowestoft, probably was Hopton or somewhere.
That place is nothing but trouble, I know, from there.
So his car always used to stop when he got up there and then start again. It was quite amusing to discuss this.
Worth mentioning, it has the highest instance of UFO sightings of any town or district in all of the United Kingdom.
Oh, right. That is interesting.
You're more likely to see a UFO in Lowestoft than any other place in Britain. So
Well,
it's
I hadn't
got
heard of
something
that.
to answer for it. Yeah, that was Omar Fowler, who was the editor of Flying Saucer Review or Flying Saucer Magazine, one of those. Came here to talk to the local group when I was running it, and I said to him, where's the hot spot? And I didn't expect him to say that it was my birthplace. I thought, whoa. So, which again is straight up the road from Rendlesham. So let's go straight at it then. How do you think they figure in this, and have you seen a UFO?
I personally haven't, but I did talk to Derek Savory when we discovered that this line that had all the poltergeist activity on cut through the corner of Rendlesham Forest, and he got very, very excited because apparently near Kirby, where activity was happening, apparently there is a portal there where the UFOs come in, and he got into a lot of trouble with the government and what have you through investigating it. But you'd need to talk to him about this.
Kirby's the other side of the river, though,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah,
it? Because
yeah.
you have to go all the way down to
that's
what's
right.
it, Orford,
Yeah,
and then you have to go or Bordsey.
Mm.
Yes, Bordsey, isn't it? No, it's Orford. You go across to Orford, and then through to Felixstowe, and then to Kirby, I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It cut.
So it goes underwater.
Oh yeah. Yes. There doesn't seem to be a problem with that. I mean, they're going to have not been underwater to test them, but yeah, they do seem to be uninterrupted. So their Earth energies, they're within the planet, and they seem to surface at times. But yeah, and they vary. But the important thing, the important message is to make sure that we are respectful of them, and that we don't dig blooming great holes.
Is it related to this, do you think, the significance of Bordsey Manor? Because Bordsey was where they invented radar, the first ever functioning radar, and the first functioning radar tower is still up there. all right, and it's always been associated with the military and weapons research. Do you think that they've done that deliberately because of the ley line down there, or do you think it's been it's just again this chicken and the egg thing, that they were drawn to do it there because they felt the vibe?
We haven't really gone out and researched anything like that enough, probably, to draw our own conclusion on it.
Certainly we don't involve ourselves with the military, thank you
try-
very much.
Well, you wouldn't, but I'm just saying, do you think they did it because of the ley line?
There seems to be an awful lot of coincidences associated with this sort of thing. The investigations do tend to suggest that people in authority, especially the military, do tend to know the right people, whether it be Uri Geller or whoever, that can tip them the wink as to where best to work from. And I know that radar does have a significance, and I haven't investigated it, but if I remember rightly, Rudolf Steiner, back at the beginning of the century, spoke about how bad all of that was, and that it was actually detrimental to UFOs.
Yeah, and it still is.
Yeah.
You know, all these stories that you hear about UFOs crashing, especially, you know, the Roswell crash and some of the others, the Aztec crash, which was only a month previous. The argument is that the radar dish, you know, the beam, struck the UFO and caused it to come down. The further allegation being that it was done deliberately. In fact, when radar was invented, it wasn't invented as a detection device. It was invented, and I quote, as a death ray. You know, the military went to the scientific community and said, can you build us a death ray? And they said, well, I don't know about that. That might be a ways off, but what we can build is something that can detect things, you know, coming from afar.
Yeah.
So it's that the idea behind it was to shoot things down, not to detect things.
So as I say, there seem to be a lot of coincidences associated with this, and I think that, yeah, there probably is a connection, but that's just beyond our remit, shall we say.
Well, they're not fools, are they?
No,
You know,
far
that
from it.
if we're sitting here and we've worked out this much, they've certainly got people who've worked it out for them.
Yeah.
Of course they have, and that's probably why more we get deterred from looking into things.
You get moving in on their patch.
Yeah, there's a reason why they like to keep things secret or make them out to be phenomena rather than fact or truth.
They've changed the word and they no longer say UFO, they say UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. That's their new buzz. So have you ever been sort of struck? I know you said you'd been staggered sideways.
Yeah.
Have you felt any ill effect in a ley, or have you been affected in a visionary sense, or couldn't sleep, or you know, any of that stuff?
Only so I had the joy of going back to my family home last year for several months, whilst I was between properties, and I had not been there for over 20 years, and it turned me instantly back into what I remember myself being as a teenager.
Which was what?
Depressive, unable to have the vast cognitive skills that I would normally have. Opportunity again got removed. Even my house plants didn't flower, started to die. To have a spider plant start to die, you've really got to go some.
Yeah, because they're tough as guts.
Yeah,
aren't
they live through everything. It was absolutely horrendous. The minute that I was in the property, it just kind of fell down on me. It felt so oppressive. And I actually became quite mentally unwell and had to have some intervention for that. I suffered, or do suffer with chronic fatigue syndrome, and that came out as well. At the same time, because I knew that I was on quite a negative line, my connection with my own spiritual guides and my own spiritual team was not so much at the forefront as it normally is.
It's pushed back.
And I would normally sit open a lot of the time, but felt I couldn't because being on the negative line, what could it draw in? Literally though, within a week of removing myself from there, everything lifted, all gone. And it just really made it quite apparent to me what I'd felt as a teenager sitting on that line. And like every time I'd gone back to visit my parents there and I got this real heavy melancholy feeling, I've now realised it's associated with that line. I do not know how my parents stay living there.
Does it affect them?
I don't particularly have contact with them anymore, but they are definitely people whose glass is half empty, shall we say.
Well, they would be living there.
Yeah, and I think they've just become so used to the way that they feel and the way that it feels. I'm trying to think how long they would have been there for. I'm nearly 40 years of age and I would have been there from the age of 11, so that's many, many years that they've been there. That I think they've just become accustomed to it and used to it. But I do see in them, they're not people who can see the positivities in life. Everything's very negative, everything's too much trouble. It's almost like an existence and not...
lethargy.
Yeah, not life, which is a real shame for them, really, that they acknowledge what we say about it, don't they?
Oh, yeah. They just accept it.
But they just accept it and carry on with
That's
it.
how it is.
Yes, exactly that. It's almost brought them down so much that they cannot see outside that bubble.
It's taken them.
Yeah.
They're possessed by it.
Yeah. And the more that they're negative, the more it feeds whatever comes through the negative line. And so on and so on. And in actual fact, across the road from my parents' house, there was an old cottage. And the elderly people there died, and the children of this house decided instead of doing it up and selling it, they thought they'd make as much money out of it as they could and wanted to pull it down, didn't they? And they've built 2 very large 4-bedroom houses on there. And we said, as soon as they open that land up, there will be issues. And there was issues. All the time I could hear the builders had hurt themselves, had fallen off this, they'd done that. I'd even stood at the on my parents' drive at the back of the boot of my car one evening, sorting the dogs out in the boot of the car, and obviously I can see demons and entities and all those sorts of things. And this thing came at me across the road. I'm used to dealing with such things, so I didn't, acknowledge it perhaps like other people would. If it had been somebody else there and not me, it probably would have just played with them for a while. They would have got a feeling of being watched, and might have even got in the car with them and just made them feel uneasy or followed them up to their front door on the way home. I personally just sort of said in my head, I suggest you stop and turn around, or I'll make you. And it did stop, and it went back. But these are properties that we're going to watch, because we see a lot of properties that are on negative lines like this, that they are properties that constantly get rented out. They have a different flow of people through them all the time, or they're constantly up for sale. There is an unease about the house. Nobody wants to stay. And we suspect that this will happen with these particular 2 houses. And then if you follow the line across the fields and into the next town along, which is Whittam, there's a special needs school there, isn't there? That my sister's actually the IT person in. And she asked us to have a look at it, because she said she was going into the school when it was fully closed for school holidays, and all the doors that were shut were now open, or vice versa. She could hear kids laughing, etc, etc. And I don't think what was in there was demonic, but it just shows that as the line went through there, it's a highway. And unfortunately in that special needs school, there's a lot of children that don't make it to live long enough to leave the age of the school, and they may have just come back or be using the line as a highway to draw themselves into that place, maybe just because it was
basically.
Ghosts, basically, yes. Nothing nasty that needed removing, but you can see how on these powerful energy lines, whether positive or negative, how it draws in the energies of spirit to use.
So the answer is to keep the energy lines as cheerful as we can. So hold your festivals, your rituals, and what have you.
Your parties.
And
yeah.
your parties.
Rock concert.
Yep.
Yeah, whatever on those lines.
Yeah.
Boost the energy, uplift them, make them good.
Do you perform your own rituals, I'll use the word spells, on ley lines ever at all? I'm sure you are at least tempted once in a while.
Is that the time?
There may be a positive line involved sometimes. But we've just been placed
You see the cat ratted you
I
out.
didn't say that.
We've just been placed in places where it just so happens that our gardens may have lines that run through them.
That's pure coincidence.
Yes.
Total coincidence.
Yeah, pure
Total.
coincidence.
It is total coincidence.
Cleaning my magic wand and I happened to be standing on a ley line when it went off.
In a circle, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing is the work on energy lines. You can create a line. The guy that taught me about dowsing, he could lay a line across the garden, and I, without me knowing where it was, and I could dowse and find where he'd laid it.
Which is exactly the same as what it is when people do magical work, or people hold circles for mediumship development, and you cast that circle. You are technically casting an energy line, which we are using for protection in these instances. We're standing within it so that anything that is unsavoury stays outside of it, and we are safe within it. So, that's a really simple way of showing how a geopathic line starts, is by a cast of it and then constantly being used.
And energy lines don't have to go in straight lines. I know Alfred Watkins in his books stated that ley lines work well. It was his term was ley line, that they were straight lines, but we find certainly from the stone circles in Scotland that there very often are strange circular features of energy that come from them. And indeed, even the Michael and Mary line, it goes around Eye, doesn't it?
I used to live in Eye for a
Right.
short time and would visit the Eye, Ley monument almost every day. Didn't bring me a tremendous amount of luck, I have to say, living there.
No, it's not the best of places. Something to do with the way it lays. Maybe that's why the energy line goes round it, because it doesn't like.
I was in a relationship with somebody who lived literally just the other side of the road from that ley point, and it was hell on earth. And I thought, well, thank you, Eye of the Dragon. You're named correctly. Dragon just about sums it up. Yeah. Correspondences. Do these things? Do the natural energy lines correspond directly with crop circles? And perhaps even with, human meridians, as the Chinese would have it. Do you see that? I mean, have you even been to crop circles at all?
No, I've not been to.
Unfortunately, they don't seem to get
crop
many around
circles.
this
No,
area.
they don't.
And I would very much like to, but having read Andrew Collins's book on the subject, it sounds as if there is a correlation between energy lines and crop circles, and I would be very interested to go and feel what he has documented.
Because you'd expect it, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You'd expect it to lay on. I mean, my personal feeling is that it's us that builds them. The collective higher consciousness of our entire species, or maybe even our planet, puts them there as a non-invasive message from the better part to the not so better part. But it's one that those who are not ready for it can still ignore, because they've got plenty of wiggle room. They can say, oh no, it's just the wind, or it's just some magnetic anomaly, There's lots of ways around it and out of it. Or of course they can blame it on hoaxes. But you could then argue that the hoaxes are themselves being manipulated by something greater than them. They think they're drawing a hoax, when in fact perhaps they're not. Perhaps the ley is
We always
pushing
love
them.
a non-believer, because quite often when we meet non-believers when we're out researching and things like that, we've met a couple of farmers at places who all of a sudden they go, oh yeah, I use my dowsing rods, I go out looking for stuff across the fields, and you're like, right, okay, so you...
What are they looking for?
Oh, what does he look for? Oh, he power cables or something that are under the ground, I think he was. And that particular place has a church that has been pulled down upon their land, which was apparently pulled down for paranormal activity. And it has a ley line that runs through there. And this guy would absolutely swear he is a non-believer in everything. Yet, you know, that's a line that perhaps would have had the potential to become corrupt. There is quite a lot of paranormal activity that happens on that farm. And indeed, the manor house there is well documented as being haunted, and there are books written on this place. But the farmer, his tractor got stuck one day, or he's ploughed, isn't it, in the field, and he's got this huge, great big of stone, mainly made of quartz, that he's picked up with his fork truck and put it on the ley line, which thus is going to help create it to be positive.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we asked him, we said, so why did you put it there? And he said, well, it just felt right. So there's something that he's working with all the time that he's not even aware that he's working with.
And is that the sort of thing you encounter very often?
I wouldn't say very often. We don't tend to come across too many farmers. If we see them, we scarf it.
But there's definitely a lot of people we come across who would go and sit.
Check the battery level on that, please. Sure.
There's definitely a lot of people that we come across that would go and sit in particular places.
Almost dead.
And obviously they're gaining something from sitting in those particular places, even if they're not aware why they keep going back there.
Okay, we just have a little pause there, because I was just aware of the fact the numbers were getting up on that, and I thought, I just got a feeling, we're talking intuition, that the battery was about to go on that, and I thought